1983. This was the first year we saw the 4BT Cummins go on sale. It was initially marketed as an industrial and commercial engine, with primary applications aimed at off-highway construction, agriculture, marine, and so much more. It truly was and is a very versatile little engine that can do nearly anything you ask of it. Because of its versatility, reliability, performance, and most importantly, the size of the engine, the 4BT has become an incredibly popular engine in the automotive world, where you can see it swapped into rock crawlers, Jeeps, trucks, SUVs, and even sporty little cars. That being said, no engine is perfect, and the 4BT, much like the 12 valve and the 24 valve and even the 6.7 Cummins, has pretty much been put on a pedestal by Cummins fans all over the internet. Sure, the 4BT is a good engine, it's a reliable engine, but it's not a perfect engine, so it's time we flip the script on its head and look at everything wrong with the 4BT Cummins. Okay, getting straight into it, right here off the bat, I want to mention that there are multiple versions of the 4BT Cummins, and many of them were never even designed to drive a vehicle. They were meant to power generators or massive water pumps or other commercial types of applications like that. With that in mind, we should quickly cover some of the differences between all the variants. This mostly boils down to the CPL number, which stands for Control Parts List, and that number is related to the specific components used on the engine during initial assembly, including emissions control components, injectors, injection pump, turbocharger, and much more. Despite the fact that there's 34 CPL number variants for the 4B Cummins, there's really only 4 versions used in automotive applications, which is 1839, 2001, 2195, and 2304. And while there is a handful of important differences between the on-road and off-road versions of the Cummins 4BT, a lot of it simply boils down to the turbocharger that was used and the injection pump that was used, and more specifically the governor spring inside the injection pump, which is what controls the maximum RPM of the engine. It's also worth noting that for the on-road versions of this engine compared to the off-road versions of this engine, the oil pan is massively different, because for the on-road versions of the engine is being put into a vehicle of some sort, and that normally means you have to either clear a subframe or an axle, so the oil pan is completely different. And much like the 12 valve Cummins, the 4BT Cummins effectively has 2 different types of injection pumps based on the year, the model, and the application that the engine was meant for. These are the Bosch P7100 pump, also known as the P pump, and the Bosch VE rotary injection pump. It's also worth noting that there are some CPL numbers which have a completely different pump. For example, CPL 1963 uses a Bosch P3000 pump, which has a power output of around 130 horsepower. With some of that basic info out of the way, let's take a look at everything wrong with the 4BT Cummins, starting with the KDP, the killer dowel pin, which is the exact same issue that you see on the 12 valve Cummins. And the reason it's the exact same issue is because the front of the engine is completely identical between the 6BT and the 4BT. And while we've covered the KDP issue pretty well in depth in our Everything Wrong with the 5.9 liter Cummins video, it's worth reiterating here. And the funniest part about the KDP issue is that it isn't a mechanical part of the engine or electrical or anything like that. Rather, it's basically an initial assembly defect. Generally speaking, when any particular engine is being assembled at the factory, the manufacturer of the engine, the assembler of the engine, is going to use dowel pins to help align the parts to ensure proper fitment across all their engines that they're assembling. One of the important dowel pins on the 4BT and the 6BT is the killer dowel pin, and that is a little pin that helps align the front gear housing during initial assembly, and it's because of the location of this pin that gives it that killer dowel pin name. This particular dowel is located above the camshaft gear and near the injection pump. It's because of this location that the dowel pin can cause catastrophic engine failure. The 4BT, much like the 6BT engine, vibrates a lot. In fact, the 4BT vibrates significantly more than the 6BT because it's a 4-cylinder engine. And what happens when something vibrates a ton? Other parts ultimately become loose. After hundreds or even thousands of engine hours and tons of different heat cycles and vibration and using the engine, anything that's not tightly secured on the engine is ultimately going to wiggle loose. And while this pin is pressed into place, this dowel pin is pressed in, ultimately all that vibration, all the heat cycles and everything, it slowly wiggles out over time. In the ideal scenario, the pin will wiggle out, possibly bounce off of a few things, and then land at the bottom of the front cover, which then it will hopefully settle at the bottom of the oil pan. Unfortunately, that ideal situation doesn't always happen, and the flip side of the coin is the pin falling out and getting lodged between the cam gear and injection pump gear. If this worst case scenario happens, it can and likely will completely destroy your engine. It'll shred apart the valve train gears, and worse than that, it'll likely destroy the cylinders because the pistons and the valves are very violently going to meet together when everything gets lodged up, all caused by this little pin. And because of how this issue occurs at random, with miles, hours, heat cycles, and vibration eventually causing it to wiggle loose, there's no predicting this problem. Luckily, there are some steps you can take to ensure this issue doesn't occur. namely a KDP disaster prevention kit, which is basically just a tiny metal plate used to keep the pin in place, and that plate is held in place by the bolt right next to the dowel pin. But because the worst case scenario with the killer dowel pin can and likely will damage your cylinder walls, that takes us to the next issue with the 4BT, which is the fact that it doesn't have any cylinder liners. Now, the issue with running no cylinder liners is that if there is damage to the cylinder walls, you have to bore out each cylinder, typically by 10, 20, or 30 thousandths in order to get it corrected. Now, that's not a bad thing for performance. In fact, that's a great thing for performance because you're ultimately going to increase the displacement. But the issue is if you have to bore it out multiple times, eventually you're going to run to a point that you can no longer bore the engine out. If you look online, there appears to be plenty of cylinder sleeve repair kits, which effectively adds a sleeve if there is ever a situation in which you cannot bore out the engine to properly repair the cylinder walls. And it's not that big of an issue at the end of the day. But on an engine with so few problems, it's one of the few things that we could actually note in this video. And for this next problem, it's either very underrated or very overrated depending on who you're talking to, and that's cylinder head cracking, and more specifically valve seat cracking. But I do want to say right here off the bat, statistically speaking, this is a very low probability problem on the 4BT. It doesn't actually affect that many engines. This generally occurs between the injector bore and the valve seat. And the rule of thumb is that if the crack does not extend to the valve seats, then the cylinder head is reusable. If the crack does extend into the valve seats, the head has to be repaired and the valve seat replaced. As to why this problem occurs, it's not exactly clear, but there's speculation that the problem is caused by the use of 9mm injectors, and supposedly switching to 7mm injectors can help eliminate the problem entirely, or at least minimize the problem. Aside from the mechanical and structural issues that we've mentioned thus far, I think it's worth noting that the 4BT is victim to its own popularity. It's one of the many engines that you'll find on the internet that's very, very popular. There's tons of YouTube videos on it, everybody's swapping it into their car, everyone says it's the best engine in the world. All that popularity leads to that engine becoming extremely expensive. And what I mean by that is that the 4BT is plain and simple overrated. We're talking about a 3.9 liter engine that'll rattle your teeth out, barely makes 130 horsepower stock, and barely makes 180 horsepower with some bolt-ons, weighs over 750 pounds, and costs upwards of $16,000 USD for a rebuilt example. I'm sorry, but that kind of money for an old, heavy, leaky engine that barely makes enough torque to keep itself alive is really, really bad. And I know there's a ton of you out there that are going to run to the comments saying that the 4BT is worth the price because it's the best engine ever, and you're not going to be able to get anything nearly as reliable for the price. But the simple fact of the matter is a rebuilt 4BT Cummins is super overpriced. You can buy a brand new crate engine, an R2.8 Cummins, directly from Cummins for the same price as a rebuilt 4BT. Or the fact that you can buy a rebuilt 6BT Cummins for under $7,000. Now, it's worth highlighting that not all 4BT Cummins are super expensive, as you can find long blocks for around $4,000 USD and then transfer over any parts that you need to. But the point still stands. For the weight and size of the engine, on top of the embarrassing power figures, it's an incredibly expensive engine, and frankly, it's massively overrated. But to be fair, this is not a problem that is exclusive to the 4BT Cummins. You could say the exact same thing about the 6.2 liter L92 engine from GM. It's basically just a 6.2 liter LS. There's plenty of examples of them selling for $3,000 to $4,000, and it's simply because of how popular of an engine it is. Really popular engines almost always end up just becoming really expensive, aside from maybe the Ford Barra in Australia. Other than what we have listed here, there really isn't much else wrong with the 4BT Cummins. Sure, there are random little issues, but nothing majorly wrong with the engine outside of the KDP issues. Mechanically, it's an incredibly strong little engine, and at the end of the day, it's a 6BT 5.9 Cummins that has had 2 cylinders of it chopped off. You can quite literally take a 5.9 liter Cummins exhaust manifold and modify it to fit a 4BT by chopping 2 cylinders off the manifold. Same with the intake plate. You can take a 5.9 plate and shrink it down accordingly to fit. This is a great way to add a 5.9 liter grid heater to improve cold starts, as many 4BT CPLs didn't come equipped with any sort of grid heater. As I mentioned earlier though, this engine is way overrated. It's become so popular on the internet that now the prices are through the roof. It weighs a ton, it barely makes any power, it'll rattle your teeth out. It's plain and simple just kind of overrated. If you guys think there's anything I missed or anything you want to add, be sure to drop it down in the comments below. While you're down there, smash the thumbs up button if you enjoyed the video. Get subscribed so you don't miss out on future videos. Check us out on Instagram and TikTok. We're posting a bunch over there, and I will see you guys in the next one.